The coffee shop was half empty, the kind of quiet that settles when the morning rush has passed but lunch hasn't arrived. The espresso machine hissed occasionally in the background, and the barista moved with the rhythm of someone who had made 1,000 cappuccinos before noon. In a corner booth, Natalie tapped her pen on the cover of a black notebook labeled Client Conflict Log. She wasn't new to tough conversations. As a senior project lead at a rising digital agency, she pitched to ICVPs, smoothed over delayed deliverables, and even talked down a tech co-founder on a caffeine spiral. But nothing prepared her for this. A client who wasn't just tough, he was impossible. Combative, contradictory, unpredictable. His name was Kenneth Ward, director of product at a Fortune 500 brand. Their agency had been hired to revamp the company's mobile app, but every week the project reviews turned into passive-aggressive cross-examinations. Deadlines blurred. Feedback contradicted itself. At one point, Kenneth even suggested starting from scratch, then denied he'd ever said that. Natalie's team was fraying. Their top designer had asked to be reassigned. 2 engineers were quietly checking job boards. Natalie herself had started waking up before her alarm, brain already running on panic and caffeine. Something had to change. That's when a friend, an ex-FBI negotiator turned coach, recommended a book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. "It's not about compromise," he'd said, sliding the book across the table. "It's about understanding." She'd scoffed. "You want me to use hostage negotiation tactics on a product manager?" "No," he smiled. "I want you to listen like one." Voss calls it tactical empathy. Not sympathy. Not cuddling. Tactical empathy is the deliberate act of understanding the feelings and mindset of another person and expressing that understanding. It's not manipulation. It's clarity. The kind of clarity that changes outcomes. Natalie flipped through the book again that morning, underlining a phrase. "You're not trying to get them to like you. You're trying to get them to see that you see them." That line hit her. She realized that with Kenneth, she'd been defending, explaining, and clarifying, but never labeling. Never acknowledging what he was experiencing. So she made a decision. No more arguing over specs. No more repitching deliverables. The next call, she'd try something radical. She'd name the emotion in the room before it erupted. The Zoom meeting started like every other. Kenneth's square appeared, expression unreadable, lips tight like he was bracing for impact. A few pleasantries passed, but it felt brittle. Then came his first jab. "I'm just wondering how many more cycles we're going to waste on design that isn't aligned with our core users." Natalie didn't blink. She didn't defend. Instead, she leaned into the very tactic Voss described in Chapter 3, labeling. "It sounds like you're frustrated that we're missing the mark. Maybe even that we're not hearing what matters most to you." A pause. Not defensive. Not polite. Neutral. Tactical. The way a negotiator might speak when standing outside a bank where someone's got a gun to a hostage's head. Kenneth raised an eyebrow. His voice softened. "Not much, but enough." "Well, yeah. I've said this a few times, and it keeps coming back slightly off. It feels like a disconnect." Natalie nodded. "It seems like you've been repeating yourself and it's exhausting." Another pause. Then, for the first time in 5 weeks, Kenneth exhaled, really exhaled, like he'd just taken off a too-tight tie. "You're not wrong," he said. "I just need to feel like someone's syncing with our actual user personas, not just surface-level data." Natalie didn't rush in with solutions. She followed the golden rule of tactical empathy. Don't solve, don't argue, mirror and label. So it's less about the wireframes and more about whether the research feels lived in. Exactly. That moment flipped the project's trajectory. The conversation shifted from confrontation to collaboration. Not because Natalie gave in, but because she saw the emotion driving Kenneth's behavior and acknowledged it without judgment. That's the core of tactical empathy. And here's what many miss. Most people just want to feel seen. They're not demanding agreement, they're demanding acknowledgement. This principle applies far beyond client calls. A teenager acting out. Start by labeling the emotion, not correcting the behavior. A partner snapping at dinner. Mirror the tension. It seems like something's weighing on you. A boss micromanaging you. It feels like there's some urgency behind getting this part just right. It disarms the tension, not by giving in, but by illuminating the emotional layer beneath the words. Chris Voss explains it with one of the most powerful phrases in the book. The sweetest two words in negotiation are "that's right." Not "you're right," which often ends the conversation, but "that's right," which signals real resonance. Agreement of understanding, not just politeness. Natalie's goal on that call wasn't to be right. It was to reach "that's right." The next day, she shared the story with her team. Not the whole book, just one tactic: labeling. They practiced it. In one-on-ones. In Slack threads. Even in awkward performance reviews. I know this might seem like I'm pushing a lot on you. It sounds like this delay put you in a tough spot. It seems like you've had to juggle more than usual. The team laughed at first, joking they were training for hostage rescues. But the results weren't funny. They were staggering. A client who always emailed in all caps stopped. An engineer who never spoke in meetings opened up. Natalie herself slept through the night for the first time in a month. And it all started with naming the feeling that no one else wanted to name. Let's pause and break this down into takeaways you can use right now. Tactical empathy. 4 immediate steps. Label the emotion. It seems like. It sounds like. It looks like. Avoid using "I." Keep the spotlight on them, not you. Don't fix. Validate. You're not solving their problem, just confirming it's real. Wait for "that's right." It's the moment you know they feel seen. This doesn't just work with clients. It works with partners, colleagues, even strangers. Why? Because the human brain relaxes when it's acknowledged. And in negotiation, a relaxed brain is more likely to collaborate than defend. That week, Natalie made a sticky note for her monitor. It read, "Name it to tame it." It wasn't a mantra. It was a mission. Because the next challenge would demand even more from her. Kenneth had relaxed. But the company's legal team? That was a whole different battlefield. And what Natalie didn't know yet was that soon, she'd have to use the exact same tactics on her own CEO. The boardroom was too quiet. Natalie could hear the soft tick of the analog clock on the wall, an odd choice in a tech company that automated everything from calendars to coffee orders. She sat at the far end of the long glass table, laptop closed, pen still. To her left, David, the CEO, looked out the window. To her right, Kevin from legal flipped through the service agreement, page by page, like he was decoding enemy transmissions. On the screen at the center of the table sat a paused Zoom feed. Kenneth's team had just dropped off the call after a tense contract discussion. Their legal department wanted out of Clause 6B, which guaranteed a set number of post-launch iterations. Natalie had spent weeks calming Kenneth down. Now legal was reigniting the fire. David leaned back and sighed. "We need to keep them happy. We'll just cut the clause. Let's not give them a reason to walk." Natalie didn't respond immediately. She just read Chapter 4 of Never Split the Difference, where Chris Voss describes the power of no not as a rejection, but as a gateway. No is not the end of a negotiation. It's the beginning. Most people fear no in negotiation. They treat it like a door slammed shut. But Voss flips that fear. He argues that when someone says no, they finally feel safe. In control. No is freedom, and freedom opens the door to real conversation. Natalie remembered something else. People will fight to the death to preserve their right to say no, but if you give it to them first, they'll walk through the door you want. She took a breath and looked at David. What if we don't cut the clause? He blinked. What? What if instead, we ask them, have you given up on ensuring the product stays aligned with users after launch? Kevin chuckled dryly. That's going to piss them off. Not necessarily, Natalie said calmly. It's called a calibrated, no question. It's not aggressive. It's a release valve. It gives them control. David tilted his head. You want to frame it like that? Yes. We're not cornering them. We're offering them a safe out, and in that space, we guide the real conversation. The next morning, they tried it. Natalie hopped on a call with Kenneth and their legal counsel. They small-talked about the market, waded through a few frozen video moments, and then got to the point. The clause, the conflict, the impasse. And then Natalie asked it. Have you given up on keeping the product responsive to feedback after we launch? Silence. Then a slow, quiet response from Kenneth's attorney. No. Of course not. Kenneth leaned forward. We just don't want to be locked into scope creep. Natalie nodded. Totally fair. So let's revisit the language. Not eliminate the commitment, but clarify it so that it protects both sides. Suddenly, the tone shifted. The energy, once adversarial, became collaborative. Because Natalie had used no as a tool of permission. She hadn't pushed a solution. She'd made them clarify their values. And when people articulate their values out loud, they rarely walk away from them. Back in the office, her team noticed something strange. Clients who said no early in negotiations were often easier to work with later. The sales team was confused. Isn't a yes better? They asked. But Voss's lesson said otherwise. Here's what most people miss about yes. Yes is often counterfeit. People say it to end a conversation, not to start one. Yes can be a trap. It puts people on the defensive, worried about what they've just committed to. Yes creates pressure, and pressure shuts people down. But no. It creates relief, autonomy, space. And in that space, you get truth. Later that week, Natalie put this into practice again. A senior engineer, Grace, was resisting a new internal tool the team was rolling out. She kept ghosting the onboarding sessions. When Natalie confronted her, Grace gave vague excuses, meetings, emails, timing. Normally, Natalie would have asked, "Do you have time this week to learn the system?" But this time, she asked differently. "Have you decided the new system isn't worth your time?" Grace blinked. "No, that's not it. I actually think it's smart. I just haven't had a minute to sit down with it." Natalie smiled. "Then let's pick a time that protects your focus. I'll block your calendar personally." Because of that no, the resistance vanished. Let's zoom out. In any relationship, professional, personal, even romantic, no is a way of establishing psychological safety. It says, I'm not trapped. I'm not manipulated. I'm not on the hook. Once someone says no, they are free to explore the real issue. And if you design your questions right, no becomes your secret weapon. Chris Voss recommends rephrasing common asks into no-oriented questions. Examples. Instead of "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Is now a bad time? Instead of "Can we schedule a call?" Would it be a ridiculous idea to hop on a quick Zoom? Instead of "Are you interested in this proposal?" Is this something you've decided isn't a fit right now? These questions lower the walls. They signal respect. And they often yield surprisingly honest replies. Natalie printed a quote and taped it to the wall in the team's war room. Yes is nothing without how. No is the start of negotiation. It became a quiet mantra. The team began collecting no's, not as failures, but as milestones. Moments that meant the real conversation had started. And then one day, David called her into his office. He was standing at the window, looking out at the skyline. "You've been making some real progress," he said. "But I need to ask you something." Natalie tensed. He turned. "Are you ready to renegotiate our biggest partnership?" She paused. "The enterprise client." He nodded. "Renewal's coming up. They've already started pushing scope. I need someone in the room who can keep the line." Natalie didn't answer right away. She thought of Voss's voice in her head, crisp and matter-of-fact. The most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. She smiled. "Then let's start by letting them say no." The first call was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp. The kind of meeting that made everyone double-check their internet, camera angle, and coffee supply. The enterprise client, Codex Systems, was one of the agency's top-tier accounts. 10 months ago, Natalie had helped land the contract. But since then, the landscape had changed. New people, new scope, new assumptions. The client now wanted to renegotiate terms, deadlines, and deliverables, all without increasing the budget. David had been clear, hold the line. No discounts. No vague promises. Natalie wasn't just walking into a negotiation. She was stepping into a room already brimming with unspoken expectations. And she knew from Voss's training, this is exactly where people lose leverage. Never try to force control, she'd underlined. Give the illusion of control instead. The Zoom loaded. 4 faces appeared. 2 product leads, 1 compliance officer, and the new VP of engineering, A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Daria, who looked like she'd already mentally rewritten the contract. After intros, Daria went first. We've reviewed the current SLA and pricing model. Frankly, it's not in alignment with where we need to be. Natalie smiled lightly, tilting her head just slightly, one of the small techniques she'd read about. Subtle cues of openness. We completely understand, she said calmly. Help me see what you mean when you say not in alignment. That was it. A calibrated question. Open-ended. No cornering. A tactic straight from the FBI playbook. Voss calls it the illusion of control. You ask how, what, or even occasionally why, but you never make a demand. You don't defend. You don't sell. You let them talk. Because people love to explain things. And in explaining, they reveal their hand. Daria leaned back slightly. Well, she began, when we scoped this in Q2, our roadmap looked different. The new architecture rollout wasn't in play yet. Now we need more flexibility around testing layers, and we assumed that was implicit in the agreement. Natalie nodded slowly. So the testing flexibility wasn't explicitly included, but it's something the team's roadmap now depends on. Exactly. And if we did keep that flexibility in, how would you want to reflect that in the timeline? Daria paused. That wasn't pushback, it was a baton. Natalie had just handed her the illusion of authorship. You decide the path, the question implied. Daria looked to the product lead, then back at Natalie. Would probably need to shift phase 2 by 3 weeks. Minimum. And how would that affect your Q4 launch? More silence. This was the dance. Each how and what question drew out complexity. And as Voss teaches, the more complexity they reveal, the more they begin to see the limits of their own ask. The secret, Voss had written, is not in giving answers, it's in asking questions that make people feel they've arrived at the solution themselves. By the end of the meeting, something unexpected happened. Daria said, You know, I think the real issue isn't pricing, it's sequencing. Maybe we need to remap dependencies before we touch the budget. Natalie didn't nod frantically. She didn't jump in with a solution. She stayed still. Let the silence breathe. Another FBI tactic. Use silence like a tool. Most people rush to fill it. But real negotiators, they let the silence do the work. And when Daria finally said, Let's regroup and send over a list of actual scope dependencies, Natalie smiled. Not because she'd won, but because they had just made her point. Back at the office, the team gathered around the glass board. Natalie drew 2 circles. Control. Influence. Guess which one we actually have in a negotiation, she asked. Someone said, Control. Nope, she grinned. Only influence. But we can make people feel like they're in control while we guide the frame. She walked them through what she'd done. What questions that invite reflection. How questions that create shared problem ownership. Strategic silence to open mental space. Mirroring, another Voss favorite, to keep people talking. Let's talk about that last one for a second. Mirroring. Mirroring is one of the most underused but high-impact tactics in human conversation. And it's laughably simple. You just repeat the last 1 to 3 words your counterpart says, with a slight upward inflection. That's it. It sounds like stalling. But it triggers a powerful psychological response. People feel heard. And they instinctively clarify, elaborate, and often reveal more than they intended. A few days later, Natalie tried this with a tricky vendor who was dragging their feet. Vendor, we've been prioritizing legacy systems. Natalie, prioritizing legacy systems. Vendor, yeah, our engineering backlog is skewed right now. Most of our resources are stuck on pre-2020 infrastructure. It's kind of a political minefield. One mirror. And suddenly, she had access to the real constraint, not technical, but political. That insight allowed her to root around the problem. Mirroring works because it taps into a primal need to be understood. And in a negotiation, understanding is power. Here's a quick cheat sheet Natalie made for her team. She called it the Illusion Toolkit. The illusion of control. 4 tactics. How and what questions. Examples. How does that affect your goals? What would make this feel like a win for you? How should we proceed from here? Strategic silence. Say less. Let their words hang. 3 to 5 seconds of silence feels like a lifetime and invites truth. Mirroring. Repeat the last few words they said. Example. We're stuck on internal dependencies. You. Internal dependencies. Avoid why, unless it's gentle. Why can sound accusatory. If you use it, soften with tone. I'm curious, why do you think that's the best path? 2 weeks after the Codex call, the revised contract came back. Not only was the pricing untouched, the client had voluntarily extended the timeline to ensure better alignment. David stopped by Natalie's desk. You're making this stuff look easy, he said. She smiled, clicking her pen shut. It's not easy. It's designed. He paused, looking amused. You're starting to sound like one of those ex-FBI types. She leaned back in her chair. Good. Because the next negotiation wouldn't involve legal teams or timelines. It would involve emotion. Natalie had just gotten word. Her most senior developer was planning to resign. And if she handled it like a manager, she'd lose him. But if she handled it like a negotiator, she might just keep the team together. The door to the small side conference room clicked shut behind her. Natalie stood in the center for a moment, listening to the hum of the events, steady and mechanical, a sharp contrast to the anxiety in her chest. Across the table sat Tyler, her senior front-end developer. Hoodie half-zipped, gaze locked on the laptop screen, fingers fidgeting with a rubber band from his water bottle. His body language was unmistakable, defensive, coiled, and halfway out the door. He had been quiet all week. No sarcastic jokes in stand-up. No late-night GitHub commits. Yesterday, HR had pinged her privately. Tyler scheduled an exit interview. Officially, he hasn't given notice, but you might want to talk to him. Natalie didn't waste a second. She'd read Never Split the Difference enough to know that this wasn't a wait-and-see moment. It was a pre-negotiation moment. One of the most delicate of all. Every conversation has a tension beneath the surface. If you don't name it, it owns the room. That was Voss's idea of the accusation audit, one of the most powerful, disarming tools in any high-stakes conversation. The idea is simple, but rarely practiced. You name every negative thing the other person might be thinking about you before they say it. You beat them to the punch, not to apologize, but to remove its power. Natalie sat down gently. Tyler, she said, before we say anything else, I just want to acknowledge something. He looked up, eyes guarded. You're probably thinking I'm here to convince you to stay. That I'm going to throw half-hearted praise at you, maybe promise some last-minute opportunity one should have offered sooner. She saw his brow twitch. You might even be expecting me to say something like, we can't lose you, while pretending like I'm not frustrated or disappointed underneath. She let the silence sit. Tyler blinked. He didn't speak, but his posture changed. Shoulders dropped a fraction. Legs stopped bouncing. She continued, you might think I'm just doing this because it's protocol. Or worse, because I'm trying to make you feel guilty for stepping away. More stillness. Then Tyler leaned back. That's actually a little eerie. You nailed most of it. Natalie smiled softly. That's why I wanted to start there. Because I don't want to hide what might already be true. And I'm not here to talk you out of anything. I'm here to understand. The room exhaled. The conversation that followed wasn't smooth. It was raw, honest, messy in parts. Tyler shared how burned out he felt, how the pace had shifted, how he didn't feel like his opinions on architecture were being heard anymore, and how, yes, another company had reached out with a more senior title, something he hadn't felt comfortable asking for here. Natalie didn't refute. She didn't reassure. She did exactly what the book taught her to do next, label the emotion. It sounds like you've been holding that in for a while. It seems like the title matters less than feeling heard. It feels like you've been doing a lot of quiet math about your value. Each line was slow, deliberate, spoken in that same negotiator tone Voss wrote about, calm, downward inflection, and without rush. She wasn't trying to fix his feelings. She was confirming them. That was the move. The goal of labeling is to lower the emotional guard, not through logic, but through recognition. Tyler didn't resign that day. In fact, by the end of their conversation, he asked Natalie, would it be okay if I gave this a week? I want to think. I didn't expect this to go like this. Natalie nodded. Of course. Later, she updated her notes. Not about negotiation strategy, about people. She wrote, everyone brings a suitcase full of fear into tough conversations. If you unzip it for them, they don't have to throw it at you. The next Monday, Tyler walked into her office with a coffee and a decision: he'd stay. But with one ask: more involvement in architectural decisions and a clearer growth track. Natalie said yes, but not because she felt pressured. She knew she was getting something better than just an employee. She was earning trust. And in negotiation, trust doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from being accurate about someone's fears before they have to weaponize them. She shared the strategy with her leadership team. Most were skeptical. You want us to start meetings by listing everything that might make us look bad? One manager asked. Not always, Natalie replied. Just when the room feels tense. When the air is heavy. That's when you pre-disarm the emotional bomb. She gave them a framework, simple, but powerful. Accusation audit template. Before a high-stakes conversation, write down 3 negative things they might believe about you, 2 fears they're carrying into the room, 1 self-doubt they might never say aloud. Then, open the conversation with something like, you might be thinking I'm here to convince you. It probably feels like I've waited too long to say this. There's a good chance you're expecting. Let it land. Don't defend. Just state. Then listen. It sounds counterintuitive, but once the tension is named, it loses control. The other side can exhale. And more often than not, they'll say the 2 most valuable words in negotiation. That's right. Natalie saw this work again that Thursday, during a tense client renewal. The client, an account they could not afford to lose, opened with complaints about response times and feeling deprioritized. Before launching into data, Natalie paused and said, you're probably wondering if we've started to see you as just another line item. And I imagine that feels frustrating, especially if it seems like your concerns haven't made a dent. The client rep leaned back. Yeah, that's it. From there, the tone shifted. They moved into solutions, not because the issues were gone, but because the feelings had been named. Chris Voss writes, when you name a negative, it doesn't make it worse. It makes it weaker. And it's true. Whether it's a hostage situation, a contract dispute, or a resignation talk, the tactic is the same. Disarm the invisible. Give voice to the silent tension. Shrink the shadow by shining a light. That weekend, Natalie sat at her desk with her notebook. A single sticky note fluttered near the edge. On it, she wrote, start with the storm, not the sunshine. Because people don't resist truth. They resist being ambushed by it. And next week, she'd face her toughest challenge yet, negotiating a raise and title with a C-suite exec who didn't like being challenged. But this time, she wouldn't ask for more. She'd ask a better question, and let him walk himself right into yes. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual. Natalie checked her reflection in the mirrored panel for the 3rd time. Calm eyes, steady breath, shoulders rolled back. She was about to walk into a conversation most professionals dread, asking for a raise and a new title. But Natalie wasn't thinking about salaries or status symbols. She was thinking about framing, and the subtle art of getting someone to say yes without ever asking for it. Yes is nothing without how, Voss had written. Push for a yes, and you corner them. Guide them with calibrated questions, and they'll convince themselves. The door to David's office was already open. He was standing, AirPods still in, pacing lightly while finishing a call. Natalie waited until he gave the universal signal, 2 fingers lifted, palm flat, before stepping in and closing the door behind her. David clicked the call off, set his phone down, and smiled. Got something for me? Natalie sat, hands calm on the edge of her notebook. I want to talk about how I can deliver more value, she said. David leaned back, intrigued. Go on. That was the moment. The conversation was now hers to shape, not as a request, but as a negotiation of mutual benefit. And that started with a single, carefully crafted question. She began softly, no urgency in her tone. How do you see the role of someone leading cross-functional strategy evolving in the next year? David raised an eyebrow. Well, I mean, it's huge. We're scaling faster than projected, and we need glue between product, dev, and delivery. Honestly, it's the crack we keep falling through. Natalie nodded. What's the risk if that gap stays unfilled? He leaned forward slightly, thoughtful now. We lose velocity. Deadlines drift. It becomes politics instead of progress. How would we measure success if someone filled that gap right? Now David paused. Natalie could see the microshift, the internal wheels turning. Not about her, yet, but about the problem. Voss had called this the design phase of a decision. You help the other side design the very solution you're about to offer, before they know it's you. David scratched the back of his neck. Honestly, consistency in delivery metrics, fewer escalations, higher satisfaction from partners, probably retention too. Natalie nodded again, slowly. What would make someone credible in that role? Especially now. He smiled. They'd have to understand our partners, be fluent in our tech stack, and already have the trust of the teams. That kind of context doesn't come in a job posting. She let the silence settle. 3 seconds. 4. Would it be a ridiculous idea to say I've been operating in that role already, just without the name? David laughed through his nose. Okay, he said, pointing at her. That was good. She smiled, but didn't gloat. Instead, she mirrored. That was good. He nodded. You just outlined the job before I could name it. And yeah, you've been doing that work. Voss had called this moment tactical framing. The setup wasn't about selling yourself. It was about drawing a map where your counterpart places you in the destination. And when it works, they believe they arrive there on their own. David leaned back. What are you thinking? Title, comp, or both? Natalie stayed in the zone. How should we handle aligning the title and comp to the work I'm already doing without disrupting the budget narrative? Notice the move. How should we? This wasn't a demand. This was a collaborative problem to solve together. David wasn't being cornered. He was being invited. He scratched his chin. Let me float something with finance and get back to you. But I think we both know this is overdue. Natalie nodded. That's fair. And I appreciate the conversation. She left the room without ever saying the words raise or promotion. And yet, both were now in motion. Later that week, the email came through. Senior Director, Strategy and Ops, with a comp adjustment and a dotted line expansion in scope. Her team cheered quietly when she told them. But she didn't frame it as a win in title. She framed it as a system working. Because this wasn't about tricks. It was about mastering the psychology of decision-making. Understanding that people don't say yes to your pitch. They say yes to their own logic. She made a whiteboard checklist and pinned it by her desk. She titled it, Bullseye Calibrated Conversation Flow. Start with curiosity, not agenda. How do you see this evolving? What's the biggest risk if this stays the same? Use how and what questions to shift ownership. What would success look like? How do we prevent this from becoming a bottleneck? Mirror key phrases. That would be a stretch. You, a stretch. Invite perspective, not pressure. Would it be ridiculous to consider? How should we move forward with this? Let silence stretch. After your calibrated question, wait. Count to 5. Let them fill the A. The next day, Natalie ran a workshop with her team on negotiation strategy. She opened with a question. What if everything you want is already sitting in someone else's head, just waiting to be framed correctly? Someone laughed. That sounds like Jedi mind tricks. She grinned. Not a trick, just design. Because that's the real secret of never split the difference. It's not about dominance. It's about design. Designing a conversation where they walk to the place you need them to go, believing they got there themselves. And soon, Natalie would need to use that power again. Not for her own benefit, but to help two partners, locked in a revenue dispute, find common ground. And this time, she wouldn't be guiding one person. She'd be navigating two egos. At once, the two founders sat across from each other like old friends at a reunion gone wrong. Ryan, COO of a data analytics startup, stared at the edge of his coffee cup like it had personally betrayed him. Priya, CEO of a SaaS integration partner, was all polite restraint, lips pursed, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Natalie had seen this kind of tension before. Not in boardrooms, but in families, in courtrooms, in hostage videos. The standoff wasn't about metrics or margins, it was about identity and fairness. For 3 months, their teams had collaborated on a joint product offering. It launched on time. Early users were engaged. The synergy had been textbook, but the revenue split, that was the crack in the glass. Ryan believed his dev team carried the heavy lift. Priya argued that her sales channels and brand power were what drove adoption. Each felt exploited. Each wanted 60%. Neither would budge. Natalie had been pulled in at the 11th hour. Not as a product strategist this time, but as a mediator. She knew from Never Split the Difference that these weren't surface disagreements, they were emotional truths buried under logic. She began not by outlining options or contracts, but with a concept Voss calls bending their reality. Perception is reality, Voss had written. If you control the frame, you control the outcome. But first, she needed to expand the frame. And that meant listening for something Voss called a black swan, a hidden piece of information, a trigger, a pressure point the other side assumes you don't know. The moment you uncover it, leverage shifts. Natalie opened the room with neutrality. I know this isn't about greed, she said calmly. It's about fairness, and a shared win that doesn't feel shared right now. Ryan scoffed. Priya raised an eyebrow. But neither objected. Then Natalie turned to Ryan. What's the biggest risk to your team if this deal doesn't move forward? He didn't hesitate. Morale. We've pushed hard for this. If it dies, it'll feel like it was all for nothing. Then to Priya. And for you. Priya hesitated. Our investors are watching. They see this as proof of our integration model. If it fails, they'll question our vision. There it was. Natalie didn't react. But she made a mental note. Investor pressure, the kind of urgency that doesn't appear in spreadsheets. She leaned back. It seems like both sides are worried about losing more than just revenue. One side risks team trust. The other, investor confidence. They didn't argue. That was the entry point. The emotion behind the logic. And that was when Natalie did something most negotiators avoid. She anchored low, but not on money. Would it be ridiculous to suggest the split isn't the real issue? That this is about legacy, not math? Ryan looked up. Priya tilted her head. Natalie continued. What if the question isn't who deserves more now, but who ensures this thing lasts longer? She'd just reframed the dispute into a collaborative future orientation. And according to Voss, this is how you bend someone's reality. You re-anchor their idea of fairness by changing the criteria. People will die for fairness, Voss wrote. So give them a new definition to rally around. Then she asked the most important calibrated question of the day. How do we design a revenue model that protects both of your legacies? Silence. Ryan finally said, maybe we tier it. Base split is 50/50ths, but if one side outperforms, sales or delivery, there's a bonus percentage. Priya didn't say no. Instead, she said, and we build in checkpoints. That way we're adjusting based on impact, not assumption. Natalie nodded. How would we define impact without turning it into a second full-time job? They all laughed. Genuinely. The tension cracked. Just a little. Over the next hour, they mapped a flexible model with a baseline split, performance-based banding tiers, shared customer satisfaction metrics, a 6-month checkpoint to recalibrate. Neither side got everything they wanted. But both sides walked out saying this feels fair. And that, Voss would say, was the win. Because you don't get to fairness by splitting the difference. You get there by discovering what fair actually means to them. Later that day, Natalie debriefed the strategy with her team. She laid out 3 key lessons. Bending reality, 3 tactics. Anchor to identity, not math. Reframe the argument in terms of reputation, legacy, or risk. Example. Is this about percentages, or about showing what your team is capable of? Uncover the black swan. Ask, what's your biggest external pressure? What's your worst-case scenario? Look for emotional leverage points they didn't expect to share. Redefine fairness together. How do we make this feel like a win for everyone watching? How would your team explain this decision with pride? That night, Natalie wrote one sentence in her notebook. Negotiation is less about money, more about meaning. Because when people argue about numbers, they are rarely talking about the numbers. They are talking about what those numbers mean, about control, about respect, about future-proofing their work. And if you can uncover the truth beneath the logic, you unlock the deal. The next morning, David stopped by her office again. He was smiling. By the way, heard you defused World War founders yesterday. Impressive. Natalie smiled. Just ask the right questions. He leaned in. Well, I've got another situation brewing. This one's different. Oh. It's internal. 2 directors. Same territory. Both think they own it. It's getting toxic. Natalie set her coffee down. Territory disputes. High ego. Internal politics. The next negotiation wouldn't be about revenue. It would be about respect, roles, and reframing control without threat. And this time, she'd have to use the late-night FM DJ voice, and maybe even the accidental no-trap. The glass wall outside conference room had become a battlefield observation post. Natalie watched from her desk as 2 department heads stood face-to-face inside, Jacob from sales ops, tall and sharp-suited, arms slicing through the air, and Lillian from strategy, calm but cold, eyebrows like razors. From body language alone, it was clear this wasn't a discussion. It was a territory war. 2 departments. 1 initiative. Both claiming ownership over a new go-to-market strategy that touched budget forecasts, lead attribution, and reporting systems. The Venn diagram was a circle, and both believed they stood in the center. David had warned her, if you can't solve this by next week, we're going to lose one of them. Natalie opened her never split the difference notes and underlined a phrase. When the stakes are high, your tone is your tactic. That day, she didn't prepare a deck. She practiced her voice. Chris Voss describes 3 tones of voice. The positive, playful voice, light and encouraging, used to disarm. The direct, assertive voice, rarely effective, easily triggers resistance. The late-night FM DJ voice, calm, slow, downward inflected, the voice of control. Natalie would need all 3, but the DJ voice would be her weapon of choice. Why? Because tone makes people feel safe enough to listen. She called a joint meeting. No agenda. Just a circle of chairs, no table between them. A trick she'd picked up from behavioral design. Structure the room to eliminate power dynamics. Jacob arrived first, jaw set like stone. Lillian followed, tablet in hand, movements precise. Natalie waited until they both sat. Then she spoke, in the DJ voice. Come. Deliberate. Low register. Let's pause the map. Just for a moment. Jacob blinked. Lillian tilted her head. What we're trying to build is bigger than any one lane. And that means this isn't a land grab. It's a puzzle. She waited. And from where I sit, both of you are holding corner pieces. Stillness. Then, without shifting tone, she moved to what Voss called the calibrated no trap. Would it be a ridiculous idea to say you're both chasing the same goal, just from different altitudes? Jacob frowned. No. Lillian sighed. Not ridiculous. Just incomplete. There it was, agreement. Not total, but crackling like a match head. Natalie mirrored softly. Incomplete. Lillian leaned forward, suddenly engaged. Yes. Jacob's team works the ground level, pipeline, metrics. We handle top-level modeling. If we don't sync, the whole thing breaks. Natalie nodded. How should we sync? Jacob shifted. We've been stepping on each other because we don't have clear delineation of visibility. Visibility? Yes. What reports belong to whom? Who gets the final say on attribution logic? That's the friction. Natalie wrote a word in her notebook. Control. She pivoted. Now was the time to invite self-definition. How would you define success for this rollout without stepping on each other's autonomy? Jacob paused, then smirked. If I can trust that our attribution data flows to strategy without rewrite or delay. Lillian added, if I can trust that strategy decisions aren't blocked by delayed sales ops inputs. Natalie smiled. And how do we build that trust before we break something? A long silence. Then Jacob said it. Co-ownership. Shared visibility. One dashboard. Lillian nodded, slowly, with boundaries built into access rights. The DJ voice worked because it did three things. De-escalated tension. Calm tones slowed their brains from fight or flight to strategic thinking. Invited ownership. Instead of assigning roles, Natalie let them define the solution. Framed cooperation as status-enhancing. She didn't tell them to share. She made sharing feel like the elite move. That night, she added a new section to her whiteboard. Tactical tone. How to make people think it was their idea. Use the late-night FM DJ voice. Calm, slow, low. Confidence without aggression. Practice saying, would it be ridiculous to consider? How should we handle this in a way that feels right for everyone? Deploy calibrated no traps. Questions designed to prompt thoughtful disagreement that leads to clarity. Example, have you given up on making this work? Mirror with intention. Repeat 1 to 3 keywords they said, with upward tone. They'll elaborate without feeling interrogated. Label microtensions. It seems like we're trying to define lanes without fencing each other in. It looks like the bigger the overlap, the bigger the risk of confusion. Later that week, David dropped by again. 2 weeks ago, I was prepping for a resignation. Now they're co-writing a rollout memo. Natalie smiled. They just needed to hear themselves say the solution. David laughed. You really are running hostage negotiations on the 7th floor. But Natalie wasn't done. Because a call had come in from an external partner who'd ghosted the agency for weeks. Now they were back, demanding a renegotiation of contract terms, and threatening to bring in another vendor. The next move would require the rule of 3, emotional anchoring, and the art of spotting fake yeses before they explode. The email arrived at 8:17 a.m. Subject, contract revisit, let's discuss. Natalie read it twice, eyes narrowing slightly. The sender, Jeff Lynn, a procurement director from a global logistics firm, had gone dark for 3 weeks. Their teams had spent months crafting a pilot integration, but when the agreement hit final review, Jeff's tone cooled. His replies got shorter, then disappeared entirely. Now, suddenly, he wanted to discuss terms again. Natalie wasn't new to this move. It was what Chris Voss would call the late-stage stall, when someone has mentally checked out but hasn't said so out loud. They avoid confrontation by nodding, smiling, and offering maybes dressed as yeses. But a yes without commitment is a lie, and Natalie wasn't about to walk into a trap. She scheduled a video call for noon. When Jeff appeared on screen, his background was blurred, his expression pleasant. The kind of pleasant that made her gut clench a little. Hey Natalie, great to finally reconnect. She smiled. It's good to hear from you. They exchanged surface-level chatter for 2 minutes. Then she shifted gears, calmly. How do you feel about where the contract landed? Jeff gave a textbook business shrug. I think it's mostly there. That was the first red flag. Voss had warned about it. Mostly, sort of, probably. Those words were smoke grenades. A real yes is clear. These were counterfeit yeses. Natalie nodded slowly, then mirrored. Mostly there. Jeff leaned back. Yeah, I mean, legal had some feedback, and there were a few areas where pricing could be, tightened up. But generally, we're aligned. Natalie didn't respond. She just let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 7. Jeff chuckled nervously. I mean, we're not walking away, if that's what you're thinking. Another red flag. That's when she used one of the most powerful tools in Never Split the Difference. The rule of 3. You don't trust a single yes. You get the other person to confirm it 3 times, in 3 different ways. If they are lying, the story won't hold. Natalie leaned forward slightly. Just so I'm clear, you're comfortable with the general structure of the agreement. Jeff nodded. Yeah. Like I said, generally aligned. 1. What part of it would you feel confident presenting to your CFO today? Jeff blinked. Probably the cost savings projection. That tracks with our goals. 2. And what would need to change for you to be excited to move forward this week? Jeff exhaled. Honestly, we're reviewing another proposal. From a different partner. There it was. The black swan. Not in what he said, but what he didn't. The real reason for the stall. A competitive bid had entered the picture. He just didn't want to say it first. Natalie didn't flinch. That's helpful. Sounds like you're in a comparison window. Jeff nodded. We are. Now she made her next move, not defensively, but anchoring with emotional clarity. It seems like you didn't want to say that out loud. Jeff gave a sheepish grin. You're not wrong. Because maybe it feels like saying that closes the door with us. Exactly. She nodded. It actually opens the door. Because now we're finally negotiating reality. Natalie didn't offer discounts. She didn't plead for preference. She asked one question, with quiet precision. What's missing from our offer that would make this decision easier for you? Jeff replied honestly for the first time. Speed. They are promising implementation in half the time. That's when Natalie pivoted to Voss's concept of bending perception. So it's not just the price. It's momentum. And risk. Jeff nodded. She continued. Would it be ridiculous to say speed is only valuable if it lasts? Jeff raised his eyebrows. She followed. If we implement faster but you need a second round of fixes later, that's not time saved. That's time lost. Jeff sighed. Fair. From there, Natalie offered a proof of process clause, an internal system her team used to benchmark success at each stage. She suggested embedding it into the contract as a transparency model. Jeff's posture changed. This is good. It gives me something I can defend internally. The fake yeses were gone. Now they were actually negotiating. That afternoon, Natalie added a bold header to her whiteboard. The rule of 3, catching the counterfeit yes. First yes, surface agreement. Are you aligned with the direction? Watch for vagueness. Mostly. Probably. Kinda. Second yes, test of depth. What part would you bet your name on? Listen for hesitation, generalities, contradiction. Third yes, emotional commitment. What's still missing for you to feel confident? If they are honest now, they weren't before. If they repeat themselves, trust builds. She wrote a second note underneath. Silence is a lie detector. And it was true. When Jeff stopped filling the silence with fluff, she found the gap. Not in price. In speed. Not in content. In confidence. And confidence was something she could rebuild. By Friday, Jeff signed. No discounts. No backdoor negotiations. Just clarity, trust, and the removal of pretense. Natalie had made a decision. From now on, she wouldn't chase yes. She'd build it, one honest layer at a time. And next, she'd be teaching the system, live, to a room full of new hires. Their first day, their first client-facing role, their first exposure to the quiet battlefield of real-world negotiation. It was time to teach them that listening is not passive. It's a strategy. The projector flickered to life as the last of the new hires filed into the training room. 20 seats. 18 fresh faces. One observer, David, leaning against the back wall with arms crossed and a slight grin. Natalie stood in front of a whiteboard with a single phrase written across the top. People are not logical. They are emotional. Negotiate accordingly. She turned to the group. I'm not here to teach you how to win, she began. Her voice calm, steady. I'm here to show you how to listen so well that people show you what matters most, without meaning to. A few heads tilted. Pens poised. Someone in the back already started typing. Natalie smiled. Let's start with what negotiation really is. A conversation where the stakes are high, time is limited, and the truth is hiding beneath the surface. She clicked the remote. Slide 1. The goal isn't to control the conversation. It's to design one where the other person feels in control. She walked them through the core tools she'd used over the past 2 months. Labeling emotions. Mirroring. The no-oriented question. Calibrated how and what. The rule of 3. Late-night FM DJ tone. Then she paused at the next slide. It showed 2 simple lines. What's really going on? What aren't they saying out loud? That, she said, is the difference between a talker and a negotiator. She turned to the group. Let's run a live demo. She pointed at 2 employees seated at the front. Ryan, a recent MBA grad with consultant energy, and MIA, a calm former nonprofit director. Ryan, you're trying to get me as team to adopt your new reporting system. MIA, you don't trust it. You think it's going to break your data flows and cost time. They nodded. One rule, Ryan, you're not allowed to ask for a yes. MIA, you're not allowed to give one. Laughter rippled. Natalie smiled. Let's begin. Ryan started confidently. So I believe this tool will save your team about 6 hours a week. MIA raised an eyebrow. And I believe it'll triple my error rate. Natalie interjected. Pause. Ryan, what could you say that would reduce her resistance instead of pitching a benefit? Ryan hesitated. Natalie gave a cue. Try labeling the fee. Let her hear it from you first. Ryan looked at MIA, then said, It sounds like you're worried the new system will add work instead of remove it. MIA nodded. Yes. And that if something breaks, we'll be the ones blamed. Ryan mirrored. The ones blamed. MIA leaned in slightly. Exactly. I've been through that before. Natalie held up a hand. To the room. Did the energy just change? Heads nodded. Why? Because he stopped selling, one new hire said, and started seeing her. Natalie smiled. That's negotiation. She wrote on the board. The listening loop. Label the fee. It sounds like you're hesitant because. Mirror the trigger phrase. We always get blamed. You always get blamed. Ask a calibrated question. How do we make this work without putting your team at risk? The next round, MIA responded with openness, would need visibility into the system logs. Assurance that rollbacks are possible. Natalie nodded. And would it be ridiculous, she asked the group, to say that now you're negotiating reality, not fantasy? For the next hour, the team broke into small circles, role-playing, testing tone, stumbling through awkward silences and breakthroughs. Natalie moved between groups, correcting posture, reframing language, reminding them, don't fix, don't defend, label and listen. At the end, she brought them back together. I want to leave you with something. She pulled a blank white card from her pocket and wrote a single word in black ink. Empathy. Most people think empathy is agreement. It's not. It's understanding. She underlined it. Empathy is not weakness. It's the most strategic weapon in negotiation. That night, as Natalie packed up, David stepped forward. You've got a gift, he said. That room was electric. She smiled, but shook her head. It's not a gift. It's a toolkit. He raised an eyebrow. Think you're ready for a tougher room? Natalie narrowed her eyes. How tough? He handed her a folder. Global partner call. 4 countries. 12 stakeholders. Translation delay. Competing agendas. She opened the folder and smiled faintly. Sounds like a party. David grinned. You'll be leading. She tucked the folder under her arm. Time to finish what she'd started. The meeting invite had more flags than a United Nations summit. German Germany. Japanese Japan. Brazilian Brazil. United States 12 names. 4 time zones. 1 objective. Salvage a joint initiative that had splintered across continents. Natalie read through the pre-call notes, scanning comments like lack of unified scope, pricing inconsistency, translation delays causing distrust, Germany threatening to go solo, Brazil, emotional withdrawal. This wasn't a conference call. This was a slow-moving international divorce, and she had 45 minutes to change its outcome. David's words echoed in her head from earlier that morning. You're not just keeping the deal alive, Natalie. You're keeping the alliance from collapsing. As the meeting began, Natalie did something unexpected. She turned her camera on, smiled gently, and said nothing. Not for 10 seconds. Not for 15. 30 seconds of silence. The German director, Thomas, cleared his throat. The Brazilian liaison, Camila, adjusted her mic. Someone from Japan turned off their camera and turned it back on again. Then Natalie spoke, in the late-night FM DJ voice. I know it's unusual to start like this, but I wanted us to feel the weight of this moment. She let the words hang, then slowly continued. There are real tensions here, real frustration, and probably very little faith that this call will solve any of it. No one spoke. That was the first signal of truth. The silence meant agreement. She continued. So before we talk about deliverables, let's talk about trust. Chris Voss called this the accusation audit, used not just one-on-one, but to disarm entire rooms. You probably think the US team has steamrolled the timeline. You might feel like the pricing model favors Europe disproportionately. You may even suspect that your voices, especially from Brazil and Japan, aren't being heard at all. Camilla's MIC unmuted. I've been saying that since March. Natalie nodded gently. And it probably feels like saying it hasn't made a difference. Another silence. This one deeper. I want to change that. But I can't do it without knowing what hasn't been said yet. She turned to Thomas. What are we missing that's keeping Germany from moving forward? Thomas looked up. Autonomy. We're expected to execute, but not design. Natalie mirrored. Expected to execute. He nodded, and then blamed when it doesn't align. Then she turned to Camila. What about Brazil? Camila sighed. We feel like the South American data is treated like a footnote. Yet we're driving 28% of adoption. Natalie labeled. It sounds like you're invisible until the results show up. Camila blinked. Exactly. Then, softly. Thank you for seeing that. Natalie didn't offer solutions yet. Instead, she asked calibrated questions. What would a fair redesign of this partnership look like to you? How should we redistribute ownership without adding chaos? What's the risk if we continue like this for another quarter? Answers flowed. Not because she forced them, but because she had designed a space where no one had to posture. From Japan came the quietest voice, but the deepest clarity. If you assign tasks without hearing us, the product won't resonate with Asian users. It will be efficient, but it will fail. Natalie repeated, slowly, efficient, but it will fail. And that, she knew, was the moment the conversation changed. They didn't reach full consensus in that call, but they agreed on something more powerful. A restructuring session, co-led by all 4 regions, with shared voice in the roadmap. They agreed to pause next quarter launches until the friction points were resolved. They agreed to one shared KPI across teams, not based on revenue, but on user resonance and retention. And before the call ended, Thomas, who had entered with resignation in his tone, said this. That's the first time I felt like we were actually partners. Natalie smiled, but didn't gloat. That's the first time we acted like it. She closed the call, muted her MIC, and leaned back. Not a single demand. Not a single defense. Only questions, tone, silence, and clarity. That afternoon, David stopped by her office. You rewrote the tone of an entire global relationship in 45 minutes, he said. What did you even do? She pointed to her whiteboard, now full of scribbles, circles, arrows, and one sticky note in the middle. Don't chase control. Create safety. She took a breath and looked up. I just asked better questions than they were used to, she said. And I made it safe to answer them. David smiled, shook his head. You know, this was supposed to be a routine series of client updates when we started. Natalie grinned. And now? You're running psychological warfare with a smile. Later that night, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping tea, Natalie opened her notebook. She flipped to the first page, the one where she'd written her first quote from Never Split the Difference. Negotiation is the art of letting the other side have your way. She drew a box around it. Then underneath, she added, but first, they have to feel safe enough to tell you what they really want.